So what we have here is a rural scene in Wisconsin. It's one of my older photographs. If you look here in the bottom, you see that it's only 3,504 pixels wide by 2,336 tall. In other words, this, I believe, came from my Canon 20D back many years ago. I'll go through an exercise about once a year where I'll go through all of my digital negatives and see if there were any that I missed that can be developed and maybe turned into something that will be profitable. And this is one of those that I stumbled onto. I then, within Adobe Bridge, will go and add it to my favorites, which you can do just by clicking on an image and then adding to favorites. And this reminds me that when I have a slow period and I want to edit some photographs, I can just go in there and edit some photographs that I stumbled onto, and that's what we're going to work on here. This was a RAW file, a .cr2 file, which is a Canon nomenclature, and I'm opening it up in Adobe Camera Raw. If you have a JPEG, you can do this virtually the same things I'm going to do here in Photoshop. If you go to filters and open up the Adobe Camera Raw filter. So it doesn't have to be a RAW filter to do what we're doing here. First thing I'll do is I'll analyze this thing for different zones of exposure. For example, the trees behind the barn here are very dark. If I highlighted just these trees, the amount of pixels here would be pretty much slammed against the left side of the histogram. If I highlighted just the sky, the pixels, because they're very light, would be pressed pretty much against the right side of the histogram. That's why when people go in and they adjust exposure for the entire image, and just the entire image rather than zones, they're rendering some portions of the image underexposed and other portions of the image maybe overexposed. So I like to do an overall exposure adjustment, but then when I get into Photoshop, I'll go in and adjust the exposure in individual areas so I can make the photograph pop. Now we're going to do a little bit of that here now. One reason I want to do this, I selected this photo, is because although the sky is very white and very light opening, there's texture in it. There's clouds, there's blue, which means I can turn this into a pretty dramatic sky, I think, with some effort. One way of doing that is going into the colors section of your palette in Adobe Camera Raw and playing with the blues, especially in the luminance side. So if you grab the blue slider and make it dark, you'll see that the sky will become a lot more dark, and you can see the blues will, and then it'll make the clouds pop. If you keep going to the left, you'll start introducing more noise. So you don't want to go too far, but if you slam the blues and make them as dark as possible, and the cyans too, you'll bring out the texture in the sky. Then you'll want to go in and increase the saturation a little bit, because the blues won't look as blue. They'll look more grayscale. So you kind of want to boost the saturation a little bit on the cyans, or aquas as it is called in Adobe Camera Raw, and boost those a little bit. The other thing to make the sky pop is to go into your highlights key and play with that a little bit. If you dial down the highlights a little bit, again, you'll make the gray or neutral tones in the sky kind of die down a little bit. And then if you want to add more color to the clouds, or I should say more luminance to the clouds, you increase the whites. Now I want to play with the shadows here a little bit, and that's going to open up hopefully these pine trees or evergreen trees behind the barn. But we'll have to see what else it adjusts. It adjusts the foreground too, which isn't all bad, but you can see that I can get more texture in the background in the trees. So because it opened up the foreground a little bit too much, I'm going to go back into my color. They call it the HSL/grayscale tab. It's basically, I call it the color tab. And I'm going to go after the oranges. And I'm going to affect the oranges and move the luminance on those just a little bit darker. And again, I'm going to increase the saturation just a smidge on those as well. As far as changing the hue, I kind of like it where it is. I maybe make it a little bit more yellow, but not much. Then I want to work on the reds. The reds here, for whatever reason, are a little light, which is uncommon in a Canon photo. Maybe that wasn't always the case in the 20D, but the newer Canon cameras tend to make the reds a little bit oversaturated. And then you'll see here there's some green here in this barnyard. Now, green grass, technically, as far as computers are concerned, isn't really a green. It's more of a yellow. So if you grab the yellow slider and move it to the right, you'll generally take the grass and make it more green. And then once you do that, you can move the green slider over a little bit more. The problem is it'll blanch out the colors in the oranges. So you want to go the opposite way on the orange slider to bring back those orange hues and go to the left a little bit. So you can reintroduce those. Again, I like to add a little bit of clarity, but not much, +2, +3. The reason is because by going too far to the right, you introduce a lot of noise in a photograph, and that's not good for if you're selling it and such. They would prefer a duller image with less noise than a sharper image with too much noise. So clarency has been adjusted. I might kick up the vibrance just a smidge, not too much. You can already see that this image is starting to pop from where it was before. Dehaze is a tool I like to use. It'll help me in the sky a little bit maybe, and it does. It kind of adds more contrast to the sky. So I like to play with that a little bit. The overall scene could probably use a little bit more contrast, but we'll play with that a little bit more when we get into Photoshop. Again, I dial back all the sharpening. Sharpening should be applied to the last step of the process, or frankly not at all until you know how the photo is going to be used. Photos that are printed, for example, can use a little more sharpening than those that are used on the web. So I turn off all sharpening, and then I'll look at this image at 100% or 200%, and I'll see if there's noise in there, and there's some streaks and stuff. One way you can fix this is by increasing the luminance noise reduction. I don't generally like to go over 20, but 20 does a pretty good job there. And then color, I'll kick this up a little bit. If there's any color noise, generally you're not going to lose detail like you can with the luminance slider. If you increase luminance noise reduction, you'll start to lose some detail in the image, and you don't want that either. You want it to be as sharp as you can get away with without having noise. And we'll sharpen this up later. It looks a little muddled now, but we'll get that cleaned up a little bit later. And so I'd say that right now this image is pretty close to being ready to open in Photoshop. I'm going to zoom back a little bit. I'm going to play with this just a smidge to open it up a little bit with the exposure. I don't want to go too much because it'll make it too contrasty. And all I'm doing here is moving this control knob on the levels adjustment tool over to the left to increase the or decrease the highlights, and move this one here in the bottom, and move it to the right to make it darker. And there, I'm pretty happy with the results. Right now this picture's looking a lot better than it was when we first opened it, but there's still some things we can do to it in Photoshop. The first thing I want to do is crop it, and it doesn't require a whole lot of cropping. I'm pretty happy with the composition here, but I want to make sure that it's pretty straight. And what I'll do is I'll take the line that appears in Photoshop and make sure that it's parallel to another line here, like the corner of the barn. And it really is. It's remarkable how well I got this one composed in the camera. So I really don't need to crop it much. And to save pixels, then I guess I'll just leave it the way it is. One of the first things that sticks out at me is this pole. This is often the case in rural scenes. You got electrical poles that pop out of nowhere. So what we're going to do is kind of get rid of this because it detracts from the whole image. And I'll borrow some pixels from nearby so that makes it look like it was never there in the first place. We're going to go here, and we're just going to make this pole disappear. Now you've got the power line that comes through here. You can try taking the healing brush and use that to get rid of the line. There's another way to get rid of it, which if there's any more of the line here, I'll show you. Yeah, there is. I'll show you here in a second how to get rid of it. Another way of doing this is by taking your selection tool and grabbing the line and getting it as close to around it as possible, and going to Edit, Fill, Content, change it to Content Aware. It'll automatically get rid of the line that way too. And then you might still have a little bit of a remnant left, but it does a little cleaner job of cleaning up power lines that exist in places where you don't want them. And there's still a little bit of it on the horizon, hiding in these bushes, and so I'm going to go in there and clean it up as much as possible. There's also, you can see it's coming back up to the barn here, so again I'm still getting rid of the power line. And I'll go through and I'll scan this image to see if there's anything else that kind of sticks out that has no business being there and just kind of detracts from the overall image. Here there's some power lines coming through the trees. I'll go through and I'll clean those up just a little bit to kind of hide them so it doesn't look so obvious. There's a branch that looks kind of stupid and out of place. There's some orange pine needles, which I don't like. But overall pretty good. Now the other thing, because this is an older camera, the older cameras didn't have sensor cleaning features like the newer cameras do. So you definitely want to check for dust spots. One way you do that is by adding a layers adjustment layer, levels adjustment layer, and then going in and increasing the contrast dramatically on it, and then then you can't make the edits on this level. You have to go down one level and go through here inch by inch and look for, like it is right here, dust spots, and you want to clean those up. And so I just go through the sky. Here's a dust spot. There might be a dust spot there. I can't tell what that is. There's one here. They usually hide out in the corners of images. And you want to go through with your healing brush, sometimes your clone tool, depending on the sky, and clean those up as best you can. Dust spots are annoying, especially in the older cameras. I don't have to do this as much in the newer photos, but they're still present even with the newer technology. You might clean up some of the clouds too. If there's some weird straggling clouds that just kind of look kind of stupid, you might go in and clean those up too. There's a big dust spot. There's a little one. You'll see dust spots more when you use a smaller aperture. If you do landscape shots at, let's say, like f/16, you're much more apt to see dust spots than you were if you use a f/5.6 or something smaller on your aperture as well. So especially in landscape shots, you definitely want to go in there and kind of look for dust spots. And there's probably dust spots in the foreground too, but they get hidden better because of the grass and such. And so when you're done, you can collapse that, and we're going to fit the screen. Now I'm going to go up here and take care of this little cloud, little string cloud here that kind of doesn't really have any business being in there. Now I'm going to do my little trick where I like to boost the colors a little bit. I go to the color lookup layer, I'll add it, I'll change this top drop down box to 3 strip, and automatically it really boosts the color beyond where I want it to be. I'll dial this back down to about 20%. If you click this on and off, you'll see that it really boosts the color. It almost makes the reds a little oversaturated. So I'm going to go in here and grab the reds using a saturation hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm going to use this drop down box, pardon me, this one, and grab the reds, and I'll dial back the saturation just a smidge so that you still have detail in the barn boards. The other thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to grab the foreground, which is this pasture or field of, I guess can best be described as weeds. I like the color of the orange, but it's a little too dark. So we're going to grab it, and then we're going to adjust the edge here so it doesn't look too obvious that that's what we did. You want to increase the feather on it pretty dramatically. And then shift the edge. Maybe you have to shift it down a little bit so you get less of the background there. And now we're going to do a levels adjustment layer. And you'll see here on the mound of pixels on the histogram that your pixels end well left of this slider here. So there's plenty of room to go in and adjust those. Now you want to compensate by increasing contrast by moving this to the right. But here, if I go and flip back and forth, you can see just how much more that foreground pops by making that little adjustment there. And then I'll dial back the opacity a little bit because it's always better to do a little less than it is to do a little bit more in Photoshop. But if you leave it right where it is, typically people will tell that you played around with it in Photoshop, and that's really not what you want. Now I might want to adjust the sky a little bit better. The way you do that is by going into your channels. Here's your layers palette, clicking on channels, dragging and duplicating the blues channel, and then this is just an easy way to help grab the sky a little bit better. If you hit Control L, then this levels adjustment box pops up, and what you want to do is move these sliders in towards the middle so that this sky is all white and the foreground is as black as possible. So we're moving this so that the sky becomes white. Once it becomes mostly white, we stop, and then we move this to the right. You might have to, you can see there's a little bit of the gray that's starting to pop in again. So you just keep going until you get the extremes of black and white. And now basically all the pixels in the sky have been selected. And then once you click OK and then hit Control, click on this layer, it grabbed all the light pixels. So I'm going to deselect the ones that are in the foreground because I don't want to grab those. So I'm using my deselection tool to grab those. I'm deselecting the ones that are in the roof. And now I can delete this layer. We don't need it anymore. We can go back to the layers palette and you can see all the pixels in the sky have been selected. And I'm going to feather the end of this a little bit just because there's some trees here. Just a little bit. And you want to be careful about this. When you're done, you want to go in and look at it and see if you can tell that there's a demarcation point between the sky and what you're making adjustments on. So now basically the sky is selected. I'm going to go in and do a layers adjustment, a levels adjustment layer again, and I'm going to make the sky just a little bit darker. And we made a really dramatic sky. I'll show you the before and after, and you can, if you remember, this was pretty blanched out, pretty bleached out. You didn't get to see too much detail in it, so now you get to see a great deal of detail. And then I'll flatten it. Sky looks good. Foreground looks good. For some reason, the red in the barn still bothers me. It could be a contrast issue, so I'm going to go and grab the reds in the barn. And then I'm going to do a contrast layer and see if I can play with this a little bit to make it pop. Yeah, there we go. Increasing the brightness, increasing the contrast a little bit, and that makes it pop a little bit more. That's good. I like that. Now one of the things I might do is I might introduce a color into a picture. This is a good one for it, especially roofs, because this roof here as it is kind of boring. So we're going to go and grab this roof. The quick selection tool did a horrible job, so I'm going to grab my other selection tool, my polygonal lasso tool. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, which means subtract, and I'm going to subtract those pixels which is basically this gutter or this edge of the roof that I don't want, and I'm going to deselect those pixels because I don't want to color that. And then I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to grab some pixels that maybe weren't selected that I do want to include. Oops. So we're just making sure this is a nice clean line. And then I can see there were some that were accidentally picked up here in this tree. So we're going to deselect those. There, now we have basically the roof that's selected. So what are we going to do here? Well, I'm going to go into the adjustment. First of all, we're going to change the edge so it's not perfectly straight. So we're going to feather it just a bit and pull in the edge inside. We're going to pull by shifting the edge in, making it less. We guarantee we're not selecting some of the stuff that's not a part of the roof. Click OK. I'll go into adjustments, add a photo filter, and I wonder if green, introducing a little bit of green to it, helps. No, I don't like that. That's fine. Blue, no. Underwater, yeah, I like that a little bit better. Let's look at it in the fit screen. Yeah, I like that a little bit better. Well, that's a little too much, so maybe if we dial it back just a smidge. There, we'll do that. 50% opacity on a green filter. We're going to do that, flatten it, we set it, we locked it in. I'm going to go and select and reselect it again. I'm going to do a levels adjustment on just the roof so we make the shingles stick out a little bit more by increasing the darks. And you'll see that the darks kind of pop out a little bit more. Just add a little more contrast to the roof so you can see the different shades of shingles in the roof. Then I got these round bales that are on the side. I'd like those to stick out a little bit more, so I'm going to go grab those. There's something dark here. I don't know what that is, so I'm going to kind of clean that up. Let's see how we're going to do this. We're going to grab the sides. Just use the clone stamp tool to get rid of that. And then I'm going to use my polygonal lasso tool again. Hold down the Shift key. And just kind of, you don't have to be too precise because we're going to change the edge and we're just going to try to increase the luminous on the inside of the bales, not so much on the edge. Feather, move the slider in a little bit, maybe not so much feather, click OK. Adjustments, levels, we're going to open up just a little bit so people can tell that there's some round bales there and so they don't get lost in the side of the building. A little too light, dial back the opacity, and then we're good to go. Now again, the last thing I do, again, if you recall, I use the Alien software, Alien Skin Software's Exposure X to kind of make the colors pop a little bit. You don't have to do this. This is a plugin that costs some money. And I'll go through and I'll look at a couple different exposures here. That one looked good. This is before, and this makes it pop a little bit more. I turn off the grain because I don't want to introduce some grain. It'll take a second to add this layer to it. I'll look at it 100%. I like it, but I'm going to dial back opacity again back to 80% so it's not quite as extreme. And the last thing I'm going to do is sharpen it using, again, the same tool. We can use, I'll show you another way now to actually sharpen it. If you duplicate the layer, and if you go to Filter, Other, High Pass, it'll make everything neutral gray. Now you want to increase the radius here to a point where you're not seeing halos around the edges of things. For example, if I go to the barn here and I increase the radius, I think you'll see this. There's a halo effect around the edges. That's way too much. So you want to move this slider just to the point where you're starting to see the halo, which is about 1.8 here and click OK. Now you'll see you've got a gray layer on top where it's selecting just the edges, and then you change the blend mode to overlay. And if you click back and forth, you can see it dramatically adds sharpening to the image, almost a little bit much. So again, all you have to do is decrease the opacity here. And I'm going to take it down to about 60%. See how that looks. And I'd say that looks pretty good. I'm going to look in the shadows because that's where noise likes to hide, and sure enough there's a little bit of noise there. So we're going to dial back even more, probably 40%. Now what the neat thing about this method is that if I like the sharpness here but I don't like the sharpness up in the sky, all you have to do is, I'm going to increase the sharpness to 65%, but then I'm going to grab my paintbrush, I'm going to change the color to 50% gray, grab my brush, and now if I paint on this top layer, I'm getting rid of any of the sharpening effect. So here, let's have it fit in the screen. Grab my paintbrush at 50% gray. Now if I go through the sky here where we don't want noise and just paint, especially in the shadows, you get rid of all the sharpening in the sky. And so you don't get any of that noise that gets reintroduced when you sharpen something. And so the sky looks nice and smooth, and the clouds look nice. They're not crunchy like they can sometimes get as a result of what you're doing. And then I'll dial back maybe the opacity just a little bit more just to be safe. And there we go. Last thing I'll do is double check the exposure with a levels adjustment to see if I need to tweak it just a smidge. And then the last thing I'll do maybe too is just double check what the computer says about the contrast. Click auto. Does it think it's too contrasty or too little? Because contrast is one of the hardest things to judge. And it comes back and it gives me something that looks totally stupid. It does say it's a little too dark, so I might dial that a little bit. And it says I could add 63, a lot more contrast, which I don't know, I kind of disagree. So maybe I'll add a little bit to it. I took the opacity down to 18%. So I kicked up the contrast a little bit, but I like where it's at. And we're done. The image that I started out with, which is here, you can see how dull it is. Well, let's go back to the previous. This is where it was. You can see the sky is very bleached out, no detail. All the colors are pretty bland. Everything's kind of pretty lame overall. And here's where we are now. Huge, huge difference. So that's it for today. If you want to follow me on my blog, you can go to Todd Klassy, TODDKLASSY, or you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook. Thank you very much. Bye.